Sarah Martinez walked through the crowded hallway of Lincoln High School, her military-style camouflage jacket hanging loose over her small frame. The whispers followed her like shadows, growing louder with each step she took toward her locker. "There goes Army girl again," sneered Jessica from behind her perfectly manicured nails. "Does she think she's going to war or something?" The group of popular kids erupted in laughter, their voices echoing off the metal lockers. Sarah kept her head down, fingers trembling as she worked the combination lock. She had worn the jacket every day since her older brother Mike had given it to her before his deployment 6 months ago. It smelled like home and courage, two things she desperately needed in this place. "Maybe she's hiding weapons under there," called out Brad, the quarterback who never missed a chance to make someone feel small. "Better check her backpack for grenades." More laughter rippled through the hallway. Sarah's cheeks burned red, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She grabbed her textbooks and slammed the locker shut, the metallic bang silencing the corridor for just a moment. In first period English, Mrs. Thompson was discussing character development in literature, but Sarah couldn't focus on the words. The jacket felt heavier now, weighted down by the stares and whispered comments from her classmates. She traced the worn patches with her finger, remembering how Mike had earned each one during his service. "Sarah, would you like to share your thoughts on how adversity shapes a character?" Mrs. Thompson's kind voice cut through her thoughts. Sarah looked up to find 20 pairs of eyes staring at her, some curious, some mocking, all making her feel like a specimen under a microscope. "I think," she began quietly, "that people don't always understand why someone does something until they know the whole story." Jessica rolled her eyes dramatically. "Deep thoughts from Camouflage girl." The teacher shot Jessica a warning look, but the damage was done. Sarah sank lower in her seat, wishing she could disappear entirely. The bell couldn't ring soon enough. At lunch, Sarah sat alone at the corner table near the windows, picking at her sandwich while watching the popular kids hold court at the center tables. Their laughter seemed to mock everything about her existence. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the messages from Mike, reading them for the 100th time. "Stay strong, little sis. You're tougher than you know." If only he could see her now, she thought, hiding in corners, afraid to speak up, letting bullies make her feel worthless. She didn't feel tough at all. The afternoon brought chemistry class, where Sarah actually excelled despite her quiet nature. Science made sense to her in ways that social dynamics never would. She understood molecules and reactions, cause and effect, the way elements combine to create something entirely new. "Partner up for today's lab," announced Mr. Rodriguez. Sarah's heart sank as she watched classmates quickly pair off with their friends. She sat alone, staring at her notebook, until Marcus Chen slid into the seat beside her. He was quiet like her, but for different reasons. Where she was invisible by choice, he was invisible by nature. "Want to work together?" he asked simply. Sarah nodded gratefully. At least someone in this school didn't treat her like she was carrying a disease. As they worked on their experiment, mixing solutions and recording observations, Marcus spoke quietly. "You know, my dad served too. Army engineer," he said the hardest. "Battles aren't always the ones you fight with weapons." Sarah looked up, surprised by his insight. "How did you know?" "The patches on your jacket. My dad has the same ones." Marcus adjusted his safety goggles. "Plus, the way you carry yourself. My dad says military families learn to stand different, even when they're hurting." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt understood. She straightened her shoulders slightly, remembering Mike's lessons about posture and presence. Maybe she had been carrying herself like a victim instead of a soldier's sister. The final bell rang, signaling the end of another difficult day. Sarah gathered her books and headed for the exit, ready to escape the judgment and ridicule. Tomorrow would bring more of the same, she was certain. The jacket would draw more stares, more comments, more reasons for her classmates to see her as different and weird. As she walked across the parking lot, she could hear the football team practicing, on the field beyond the school. Their shouts and whistle blows created a soundtrack of normalcy that she would never be part of. She quickened her pace, eager to reach the safety of home where she could shed the jacket and the weight of everyone's opinions. But as she reached the edge of the school property, Something made her pause and look back. Lincoln High School stood against the afternoon sky like a fortress she could never quite conquer. Tomorrow she would return, wearing Mike's jacket like armor, ready to face another day of being the girl who didn't fit in. She had no way of knowing that everything was about to change, that the very thing making her different would soon make her the most important person in the entire school. The jacket that marked her as an outsider was about to become her greatest strength, and the classmates who laughed at her would soon see her in a completely different light. The next morning brought the same routine of whispers and stares, but Sarah noticed something different in Marcus's greeting. He nodded at her with what looked like respect, and it gave her enough courage to hold her head a little higher. During second period history, Mr. Patterson was discussing military conflicts when Jessica raised her hand with a smirk. Maybe Sarah can tell us all about war since she's dressed for it every day. The class erupted in the usual laughter, but this time Sarah surprised everyone, including herself, by speaking up. Actually, my brother is serving overseas right now. This jacket belonged to him before his deployment. The laughter died down, and Mr. Patterson seized the moment. That's very brave of your family, Sarah. Military service requires tremendous sacrifice, not just from the soldiers, but from their families too. Jessica looked uncomfortable for the first time, but quickly recovered. Well, that doesn't mean she has to dress like she's in the army too. Maybe she's proud of her brother, Marcus said quietly from the back of the room. Maybe some things are more important than looking cool. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. Someone had stood up for her, and it wasn't even a friend, just someone who understood. At lunch, instead of sitting alone, Sarah found herself walking toward Marcus's table near the library. He looked up as she approached and without a word gestured to the empty chair across from him. My dad wanted me to ask you something, Marcus said, between bites of his apple. What unit is your brother with? Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him Mike's latest photo taken somewhere in the desert with his squad. Marcus studied it carefully, then smiled. Dad thought so. He knows some guys in that unit. Says they're the real deal. What does that mean? Sarah asked. It means they're not just playing soldier. They're the ones who do the dangerous missions, the ones other units call when things get serious. Marcus leaned forward. Your brother's a hero, Sarah. And that jacket you wear, those patches mean something. For the first time since Mike had left, Sarah felt proud instead of embarrassed. The jacket wasn't just clothing. It was a connection to something bigger than high school drama. That afternoon during PE class, Coach Williams announced they would be doing outdoor activities on the football field. Sarah usually dreaded PE, but today felt different. As they jogged around the track, she found herself keeping pace with the athletes instead of lagging behind. Look at Camouflage girl run, Brad called out. Guess all that army training is paying off. But there was less venom in his voice than usual, and Sarah realized that Marcus's words in history class had shifted something. People were starting to see her differently, not just as the weird girl in military surplus, but as someone with a real connection to something they only saw in movies. After school, Sarah decided to stay and watch football practice from the bleachers. She wasn't sure why, but something drew her to observe the organized chaos of the team running plays and hitting practice dummies. The coaches shouted orders like military drill sergeants, and she found the structured environment oddly comforting. You thinking about joining the team? A voice asked behind her. Sarah turned to see Emma Rodriguez, one of the quieter girls from her chemistry class. She wasn't popular like Jessica, but she wasn't invisible like Sarah either. Girls can't play football, Sarah replied. No, but Coach Williams is starting a military fitness program after school. My cousin goes to East High and they have one. Kids learn discipline, physical training, leadership skills. Emma sat down beside her. Might be something you'd be good at. Sarah considered this. A program that valued the things Mike had taught her, where being different might actually be an advantage. When does it start? Next week. Coach is looking for students who are serious about fitness and discipline, not just the popular kids who want another activity for college applications. Emma glanced at Sarah's jacket. Someone like you might actually have an edge. As practice ended and the football players headed to the locker room, Sarah noticed several of them looking her way. Not with mockery this time, but with something that might have been curiosity. Word was spreading that the quiet girl in camouflage had a brother serving overseas, and that changed the dynamic in ways she was just beginning to understand. Walking home, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months at Lincoln High. Hope. Maybe she didn't have to be invisible. Maybe the very thing that made her different could make her valuable. The jacket that had been her shield might become her strength. She pulled out her phone and typed a message to Mike. Things are getting better here. I think I'm starting to understand what you meant about standing tall. The response came quickly. Told you so, little sis. Sometimes it takes time for people to see what's really important. Keep wearing that jacket with pride. Sarah smiled as she walked up the driveway to her house. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since Mike left, she felt ready to face them. The girl who had been hiding in corners was learning to step into the light, and Lincoln High School was about to discover what real strength looked like. Monday morning brought an unexpected announcement over the school's intercom system. Principal Hayes's voice crackled through the speakers during first period. Students interested in the new military fitness and leadership program should report to the gymnasium after school today for information and sign up. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was real. Coach Williams had actually gotten approval for the program Emma had mentioned. Around her, classmates were already buzzing with conversation. How about the announcement? Sounds perfect for Army Girl, Jessica whispered loudly enough for half the class to hear. Finally, somewhere she'll fit in. But this time, instead of shrinking away, Sarah met Jessica's gaze directly. Maybe it is perfect for me, she said clearly. Maybe it's exactly where I belong. The confidence in her own voice surprised her. Jessica blinked, clearly not expecting a response, and turned back to her friends with less certainty than usual. During lunch, Sarah wasn't surprised to find Marcus already discussing the program with Emma and two other students she recognized, but had never spoken to. David Kim was on the wrestling team but kept to himself, and Ashley Turner was known for her perfect grades and quiet determination. You thinking about signing up? David asked as Sarah approached their table. Definitely, Sarah replied, settling into the now familiar chair across from Marcus. What about you? My wrestling coach thinks it might help with discipline and mental toughness, David explained. Plus, college applications look better with leadership activities. Ashley nodded, enthusiastically. I've been reading about military academies. This could be good preparation, and the leadership training would be valuable for any career. Emma grinned. My cousin says the program at East High completely changed some kids. They went from being nobodies to being student leaders. The physical training is intense, but the confidence it builds is incredible. As they talked, Sarah noticed other students glancing their way with interest rather than mockery. Word was spreading that the military program might be something special, not just another after-school activity. In chemistry class, Mr. Rodriguez made an announcement that caught everyone's attention. I'll be helping coordinate some of the academic components of the new military leadership program. Students who participate will have opportunities for advanced science projects, including some that might interest military academies or ROTC programs. Sarah felt a surge of excitement. Chemistry was one of her strongest subjects, and the idea of combining it with military applications fascinated her. She raised her hand for the first time in weeks. What kind of projects? She asked. Communications, technology, materials science, even some basic engineering principles. The military uses more science than most people realize. Mr. Rodriguez smiled at her enthusiasm. Students with strong academic records and genuine interest in military applications would be ideal candidates. After class, Jessica cornered Sarah by her locker. But instead of her usual mocking tone, she seemed almost uncertain. So you're really going to join this military thing? Sarah closed her locker and faced her former tormentor. Yes, I am. Why? I don't know. It just seems so. Jessica paused, searching for words. So serious, like what if you actually want to join the army or something? What if I do? Sarah asked simply. What if that's not something to be ashamed of? Jessica looked genuinely confused by the question. In her world, military service wasn't something teenagers aspired to. It was something that happened to other people, people who couldn't afford better options. But Sarah's quiet confidence was forcing her to reconsider assumptions she'd never questioned. The afternoon PE class took place on the football field again, and this time Coach Williams paid special attention to Sarah during the running exercises. "Martinez," he called out as she finished her laps. "Good pace, good form. You been training somewhere?" "My brother taught me some things before he deployed," Sarah replied, breathing hard, but not winded like some of her classmates. "What branch?" "Army. He's with the 82nd Airborne." Coach Williams nodded approvingly. "Elite unit. Your brother know about the program we're starting?" "I mentioned it. He thinks it's a good idea. Tell you what, if you sign up today, I'll put you in touch with some current military personnel who can give you the real story about service options. Fair warning, though, this program isn't going to be easy. Physical training, academic requirements, leadership challenges. Some kids who sign up will quit within the first month." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I won't quit." Something in her voice made Coach Williams study her more carefully. "I believe you won't. See you in the gym after school." As the final bell rang, Sarah felt a nervous excitement building in her stomach. This was it, the moment that could change everything about her high school experience. Instead of being the girl everyone laughed at, she could become someone they respected. Walking toward the gymnasium, she saw a surprising number of students heading the same direction. The program was attracting more interest than anyone had expected. But as she pushed through the doors and saw Coach Williams setting up equipment and information tables, Sarah knew she was exactly where she needed to be. The jacket that had made her an outsider was about to make her a leader, and everyone at Lincoln High School was about to learn that sometimes the person you underestimate is exactly the person you need. The gymnasium filled with more students than Coach Williams had expected. Sarah counted at least 30 kids, including several football players, some honor students, and surprisingly, a few of the popular crowd. Even Brad, the quarterback who had mocked her countless times, stood near the back with his arms crossed, looking skeptical but curious. "Welcome to the Military Leadership and Fitness Program Information Session," Coach Williams announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had served. "Before we begin, I want to make something clear. This isn't summer camp, and it's not going to boost your college applications if you're not willing to earn it." He gestured toward a table displaying various military patches, certificates, and photos. "This program will teach you discipline, physical fitness, leadership skills, and respect. It will also challenge you in ways you've probably never been challenged before." Sarah noticed several students shifting uncomfortably. The coach's serious tone was already weeding out those who weren't truly committed. "Now, I want to introduce someone who can tell you what real military service looks like," Coach Williams continued. "Sergeant First Class Rodriguez has agreed to speak with you today." A woman in Army dress uniform stepped forward, her bearing confident and professional. Sarah recognized the name. She must be related to Mr. Rodriguez and Emma. "My name is Maria Rodriguez," the sergeant began. "I've served 3 deployments overseas, and I can tell you that the military taught me everything I know about leadership, perseverance, and working as part of a team." She scanned the group of students with sharp eyes. "Some of you are here because you think this might be fun or easy. Others are here because you're genuinely interested in military service or developing discipline. I can usually tell the difference within the first week." Her gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment, taking in the worn camouflage jacket and the confident way she stood. "I see we have some students who already understand military culture. That's good. But it doesn't mean you get a free pass. Everyone starts equal in this program." Coach Williams took over again, explaining the structure. 3 days a week after school, physical training, classroom instruction on leadership principles, community service projects, and monthly challenges that would test everything they'd learned. "Applications are due Friday," he announced. "They include essays, physical fitness baselines, and teacher recommendations. We'll accept 20 students maximum." As students began to disperse, some picking up application packets and others heading straight for the exit, Sergeant Rodriguez approached Sarah directly. "Your brother serving?" she asked, nodding at the jacket. "Yes, ma'am. 82nd Airborne." "Outstanding unit. He know you're interested in this program?" "Yes, ma'am." He encouraged it. Sergeant Rodriguez smiled for the first time. "Good. But remember, you're not your brother. You'll have to prove yourself on your own merits." She handed Sarah an application packet. "I'll be interested to see what you can do." Walking out of the gymnasium, Sarah found herself surrounded by Marcus, Emma, David, and Ashley. They were all buzzing with excitement and nervous energy. "Did you see Jessica's face when the sergeant talked about weeding people out?" Emma giggled. "I don't think she expected it to sound so intense. The physical fitness requirements are serious," David noted, scanning his application packet. 5-mile runs, obstacle courses, strength training. This isn't going to be like regular PE class." Sarah felt a flutter of nerves, but also determination. Mike had been preparing her for challenges like this without her even realizing it. All those early morning runs, the push-ups and sit-ups he'd made her do, the way he'd taught her to stand up straight and speak clearly. It had all been training. That evening at dinner, Sarah showed her parents the application packet. Her mother looked concerned about the physical demands, but her father, a veteran himself, nodded approvingly. "This is exactly what you need," he said, reading through the requirements. "Structure, discipline, purpose. Your brother would be proud." "Are you sure you want to do this, honey?" her mother asked. "It sounds very demanding, and you're already dealing with so much at school." Sarah thought about the months of mockery, the isolation, the way she'd been shrinking into herself. "Mom, I need to do this. I need to become someone stronger." Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into preparing her application. The essays asked about leadership experience, personal challenges, and long-term goals. For the first time, in months, she had clear answers. She wrote about helping her family cope with Mike's deployment, about maintaining her grades while dealing with the stress of having a brother in a combat zone, about learning that real strength wasn't about fitting in, but about standing up for what mattered. Marcus helped her practice for the fitness assessment, timing her runs, and encouraging her through push-up sets in the school courtyard. Word spread quickly that the quiet girl in Camouflage was serious about the military program, and attitudes began to shift. "I heard Sarah ran a 6.5-minute mile yesterday," someone whispered in the hallway. "Did you know her brother is Special Forces or something? She's actually pretty tough." The whispers were changing from mockery to respect, and Sarah began to walk differently through the halls. The jacket no longer felt like a shield she was hiding behind, but like armor she was proud to wear. On Friday morning, she submitted her completed application to Coach Williams. As she handed it over, he looked at her seriously. "You ready for this, Martinez?" "Yes, sir," she replied without hesitation. "Good, because if you get accepted, there's no backing out. This program will change you, and everyone around you will notice." Sarah smiled. "That's exactly what I'm hoping for." As she walked away, she had no idea that her transformation was about to accelerate far beyond anything she had imagined, and that very soon, the entire school would see her in a way that would shock everyone, including herself. 2 weeks into the military leadership program, Sarah had found her element. The 20 students who had been accepted were pushed to their limits daily, but Sarah thrived under the structured challenges. While others complained about the early, morning PT sessions and demanding academic requirements, she approached each task with the discipline Mike had instilled in her. "Martinez, front and center," Sergeant Rodriguez called during Thursday's session. Sarah jogged to the front of the formation, no longer the timid girl who had hidden in classroom corners. The program had awakened something in her that had been dormant for too long. "Today's leadership exercise," the sergeant announced. "Your squad needs to get everyone across this obstacle course in under 10 minutes. Martinez, your team leader." Sarah looked at her assigned team. Marcus, who was reliable but not particularly athletic. Katie Morrison, a popular girl who had joined more for college applications than genuine interest. Tommy Chen, David's younger brother who was struggling with the physical demands, and surprisingly Brad, the quarterback who had spent months making fun of her. "This should be interesting," Brad muttered under his breath. Sarah ignored his attitude and studied the obstacle course. Rope climbs, wall traversals, mud crawls, and a final team challenge that required everyone to get over a 12-foot wall together. "Listen up," she said, her voice carrying new authority. "We're not competing against each other, we're working as a team. Everyone has strengths, and we're going to use them." She assigned roles based on each person's abilities. Marcus would handle strategy and timing. Katie would motivate team members through difficult sections. Tommy would navigate the technical obstacles with his smaller size, and Brad would use his strength for the physical challenges. "What about you?" Brad asked, his tone more curious than mocking. "I coordinate and adapt," Sarah replied simply. "Let's move." What happened next surprised everyone, including Coach Williams and Sergeant Rodriguez, who were observing from the sidelines. Sarah led her team through the course with precision and efficiency, making quick adjustments when obstacles proved more difficult than expected. She boosted Tommy over walls, guided Katie through rope climbs, and coordinated with Marcus to develop alternative routes when their original plan hit snags. Most importantly, when Brad struggled with a balance beam section that required finesse rather than strength, Sarah didn't hesitate to coach him through it patiently, despite all the times he had humiliated her. They finished with 30 seconds to spare, the only team to complete the course within the time limit. "Outstanding work, Martinez," Sergeant Rodriguez said as the team caught their breath. "That's exactly the kind of leadership we're trying to develop." Brad approached Sarah as they headed back to the school building. "Hey," he said quietly. "That was really good leadership back there. I mean, I know I've been a jerk to you before." Sarah looked at him, seeing uncertainty in his eyes that she'd never noticed before. "Thanks. We all have things we're good at." "Yeah, but you figured out what everyone's strengths were and used them. That's not easy." Brad paused. "I've been thinking about what you said that day about people not understanding someone's story. Maybe I should have tried to understand yours." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was progress. Sarah nodded and continued walking, feeling the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders in a way that felt natural and right. That afternoon, during regular PE class, an unexpected visitor appeared on the football field. A Black Hawk helicopter circled overhead, its distinctive sound causing every student to stop what they were doing and stare at the sky. "What's that doing here?" someone shouted over the noise. Coach Williams blew his whistle and gathered the students. "Scheduled visit," he announced. "Part of the military program demonstration for next week's assembly." But Sarah noticed something that made her heart race. The helicopter's markings looked familiar, and as it began to descend toward the football field, she recognized the unit insignia. It was the same one Mike wore on his uniform. The helicopter touched down on the 50-yard line, its rotors creating a whirlwind of dust and grass. The entire school seemed to have gathered at the windows and around the field perimeter, watching in amazement as uniformed soldiers emerged from the aircraft. Sarah stood frozen, her mind processing what she was seeing. Then, as one of the soldiers removed his helmet and looked around the crowd of students, her world stopped completely. It was Mike, her brother, who was supposed to be thousands of miles away in a combat zone, was walking across the football field of Lincoln High School in full military gear. But something was wrong. His arm was in a sling, and he moved with a slight limp that hadn't been there when he left. Their eyes met across the field, and Mike's face broke into the familiar grin that had always made everything seem okay. He was hurt, but he was alive, and he was home. Sarah started running before she even realized she was moving, her legs carrying her across the field toward the brother she hadn't seen in 8 months. Behind her, she could hear the shocked voices of her classmates as they realized the connection. "That's Sarah's brother. The girl in camouflage, that's her brother. He came home." As she reached Mike and threw her arms around him, careful of his injured arm, Sarah heard something she'd never heard before at Lincoln High School. The students were cheering. For her. For Mike. For a moment, that transformed the quiet girl in the military jacket from an outcast into someone whose story everyone suddenly wanted to understand. The Black Hawk helicopter, the soldier brother, and the girl who had been laughed at for wearing camouflage had just created a moment that would be talked about for years. And everyone at Lincoln High School was beginning to realize that they had completely misjudged Sarah Martinez. The gymnasium had never been so packed for a school assembly. Word had spread through Lincoln High like wildfire after Mike's dramatic arrival, and every student, teacher, and staff member wanted to hear the story behind the helicopter landing, and the quiet girl who had become the center of everyone's attention. Sarah sat in the front row with the other military leadership program participants, wearing Mike's jacket with a pride that radiated from every thread. Beside her, Marcus, Emma, David, and Ashley beamed with the reflected glory of being associated with the girl everyone was suddenly calling a hero. Mike stood at the podium in his dress uniform, his injured arm in a professional-looking sling that somehow made him appear more impressive rather than diminished. Beside him stood Sergeant Rodriguez and two other soldiers who had arrived with the helicopter. 3 weeks ago, Mike began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent gymnasium, my unit was involved in an operation to rescue hostages being held by enemy forces. During that mission, I was wounded when our convoy hit an improvised explosive device. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Sarah felt her mother's hand squeeze her shoulder from the row behind. But that's not why I'm here today, Mike continued. I'm here because during my recovery, I received letters from my sister describing a new military leadership program at her school. She wrote about learning discipline, about facing challenges, about discovering strength she didn't know she had. His eyes found Sarah in the crowd. What she didn't tell me was that she was facing battles of her own right here at Lincoln High School. Battles against ignorance, against bullying, against people who couldn't see past a camouflage jacket to the courage underneath. The silence in the gymnasium was complete. Jessica, who sat several rows back, stared at her hands, her face flushed with shame. My commanding officer gave me permission to make this visit because what's happening in this school's military program represents everything we fight for overseas. Young people choosing service over selfishness, discipline over comfort, leadership over popularity. Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward. I've been observing your military leadership program for 3 weeks now. In that time, I've watched 20 students transform themselves through dedication and hard work. But one student has shown exceptional leadership potential. Sarah's heart began to pound as she realized where this was heading. Sarah Martinez has demonstrated tactical thinking, natural command presence, and the ability to inspire others to exceed their own expectations. Based on my observations and recommendations from Coach Williams and Mr. Rodriguez, she has been selected to attend the National Student Leadership Conference at West Point Military Academy this summer. The gymnasium erupted in applause. Sarah sat stunned as her classmates cheered, the same students who had mocked her just months earlier now celebrating her achievement. She saw Brad clapping enthusiastically, Jessica looking shocked, but joining, the applause and teachers nodding with approval and pride. Mike's voice cut through the noise. But the real reason I'm here isn't to talk about military service or leadership programs. I'm here to tell you about my sister. The crowd quieted again, hanging on his every word. Sarah wore my jacket to school every day while I was deployed, even though she knew it made her different, even though some of you made fun of her for it. She wore it because she was proud of me, proud of what I was doing, even when that pride came at a personal cost. He paused, letting his words sink in. That's real courage. Not the kind you show in combat, but the kind you show when you stand up for what matters, even when you're standing alone. My sister taught me something while I was overseas. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just keep being yourself when everyone wants you to be someone else. The applause that followed was different this time, deeper and more meaningful. Students who had ignored Sarah for months were seeing her clearly for the first time, understanding that they had missed something important about the quiet girl in military surplus. As the assembly concluded and students began filing out, Sarah found herself surrounded by classmates who had never spoken to her before. They wanted to shake her hand, congratulate her, ask about the West Point program, and hear about Mike's service. Sarah, a familiar voice called out. She turned to see Jessica approaching nervously. Could I talk to you for a minute? They stepped, aside from the crowd, and Jessica struggled to find words. I owe you an apology, a big one. I've been horrible to you and I didn't understand. You don't have to apologize, Sarah said quietly. Yes, I do. What your brother said up there, about standing alone for what you believe in. I've never done anything that brave in my entire life. I've always just gone along with the crowd even when the crowd was being cruel. Sarah studied Jessica's face and saw genuine remorse. Maybe you can start now. Being brave, I mean, it's never too late. As the gymnasium emptied, Sarah found herself alone with Mike for the first time since his arrival. He pulled her into another, careful hug, mindful of his injured arm. I'm so proud of you, little sis. You took everything I taught you and made it your own. Are you okay? Really okay? Sarah asked, touching the edge of his sling gently. I will be. The doctors say full recovery in a few months. But Sarah, what you've accomplished here is more impressive than anything I've done overseas. You turned adversity into strength, and you did it without losing who you are. Sarah looked around the gymnasium where she had suffered through countless, awkward assemblies, feeling invisible and unwanted. Now it was the place where she had been recognized as a leader, where her story had been told, where her classmates had finally seen her true worth. The jacket, she said softly. Keep it, Mike said firmly. You've earned the right to wear it. You've honored what it represents better than I ever could. Sarah smiled, feeling the weight of the jacket settle around her shoulders like a mantle of responsibility and pride. What happens now? Now you keep leading. Keep showing people what real strength looks like. Keep being the person who stands up for what's right, even when it's hard. Mike grinned. And this summer, you're going to West Point where you'll, learn from some of the best military leaders in the world. As they walked out of the gymnasium together, Sarah noticed the difference in how people looked at her. The stares were still there, but they were filled with respect and admiration instead of mockery. Students nodded as she passed, some even approaching to congratulate her or ask questions about the leadership program. Marcus, Emma, David, and Ashley were waiting by her locker, their faces glowing with excitement and pride for their friend's achievement. So, Marcus said with a grin, I guess we're friends with the girl who's going to West Point now. You were friends with me before anyone knew about West Point, Sarah replied. That's what made you real friends. Emma hugged her tightly. You're going to be amazing there. They have no idea what's coming. Over the following weeks, Lincoln High School transformed around Sarah. The military leadership program grew in popularity as more students wanted to be part of something that had produced such an impressive success story. Coach Williams had to start a waiting list for the next semester. More importantly, the culture of the school began to shift. Students who had been targets of bullying found their voices, inspired by Sarah's example of standing strong in the face of adversity. The popular crowd, led by a genuinely reformed Jessica, began reaching out to students they had previously ignored. Brad approached Sarah one day after a particularly challenging leadership exercise, where she had once again demonstrated her natural command abilities. I've been thinking about what I want to do after graduation, he said. Maybe the military isn't such a bad option. Think you could help me with an application to the leadership program next year? Sarah smiled, remembering the boy who had once mocked her military jacket and called her names. I think that could be arranged. On her last day before leaving for the West Point conference, Sarah stood in the hallway where she had once been tormented and humiliated. The same lockers lined the walls. The same fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but everything felt different now. She was no longer the girl hiding in corners, hoping to be invisible. She was Sarah Martinez, future military leader, someone who had turned her greatest source of shame into her greatest strength. The camouflage jacket that had once marked her as an outsider now symbolized everything she had overcome and everything she was becoming. As she walked through the halls one final time, students called out encouragement and good wishes. Teachers stopped her to express their pride in her accomplishments. Even the custodial staff who had watched her transformation from quiet outcast to confident leader offered their congratulations. But the moment that meant the most came when she saw a younger student, probably a freshman, being teased by a group of older kids. Without hesitation, Sarah approached the situation. Is there a problem here? She asked calmly, her presence immediately changing the dynamic. The older students, recognizing her as the girl who had become something of a school legend, quickly dispersed. The younger student looked up at her with grateful eyes. "Thank you," the girl whispered. "What's your name?" Sarah asked gently. "Amy. Amy Chen. I'm Tommy's cousin." Sarah smiled, remembering Tommy from her leadership program team. "Tell you what, Amy, if anyone gives you trouble, you let me know when I get back from my conference. And in the meantime, remember that being different isn't something to be ashamed of. Sometimes it's exactly what makes you special." As Amy walked away with renewed confidence, Sarah realized that her story had come full circle. She was no longer just surviving high school, she was changing it. The girl who had been laughed at for wearing camouflage had become the person others looked to for strength and protection. Mike found her that evening as she packed for West Point, carefully folding his jacket and placing it in her suitcase. "Ready for the next adventure?" he asked. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror, seeing not the frightened girl who had started the school year, but a young woman who had discovered her own power and learned to use it wisely. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it completely. The camouflage jacket that had once been her shield had become her banner, and Sarah Martinez was ready to carry it into whatever challenges lay ahead. She had learned that real strength wasn't about fitting in, but about standing out for all the right reasons. And that lesson would serve her well, whether she was leading fellow students at West Point or fellow soldiers on future battlefields. The girl who had been mocked for her differences had become the leader others aspired to follow, and Lincoln High School would never be the same.